Good morning, everyone. Welcome to your Akron Urban League's annual Martin Luther King Jr. Celebration Breakfast. On behalf of the Akron Urban League's board and staff, we are grateful that each of you were willing to sign in and join us this morning in celebrating the life and legacy of Dr. King, whose dream was one of equity and equality for all people. Over 50 years after Dr. King's assassination, the country still pauses today to reflect on his personal contributions to the fight for basic human rights and their universal implications in our current world. I confess that meaningful reflection led me to learn and relearn about the hundreds of acts he made to improve race relations in our country, and the stark contrast to the contributions I've made in my own life. Dr. King, you have inspired me to examine my own choices, and I regret that I did not like what I found. Today, I make a commitment to you and those I care about to begin stepping into the awkward, the uncomfortable, the friction, from the Christmas table to the conference room. We learned that at a very upscale dinner that honored you for your Nobel Peace Prize, remarked, "I am tempted to stay here in a more serene life, but I must return to the valley of anger and prejudice." Maybe we all need to spend more time in that valley. I make a posthumous promise to you to say more, not for the sake of antagonism, but because I truly believe that better is possible. I make a promise not to let bigotry voiced in my presence stand unchallenged, because as you said, to remain silent in the face of oppression and cruelty is the ultimate tragedy. And I ask each of you watching today to make similar promises. The Akron Urban League accepts the challenge to continue the work of Dr. King's great legacy. I want to take this moment to thank our generous sponsors. We would not be here today without them. We owe a special thank you to our presenting sponsor, the Synthomer Foundation, and our supporting sponsor, TCF Bank. Let's hear from them now.
We are delighted to be a sponsor of the Akron Urban League's Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. celebration, honoring this great legend who dedicated his life fighting for justice and civil rights for people of color. And as we reflect today on the life and legacy of Dr. King, we should be reminded of one of his most relevant quotes, which reads, "The time is always right to do what is right." Now, there is still a lot of work to be done around diversity, inclusion, and equity in our community, but I am convinced that together with all of us doing the right thing, we can make the greatest impactful change ever. And as we venture into this new year, we are also very excited about our long-term partnership with the Akron Urban League, and we encourage all of you to continue to support the work and the great mission of this organization. So enjoy this virtual event, stay safe, and be well.
Good morning, brothers and sisters, friends and colleagues. It is my honor to be here this beautiful day in 2021 to celebrate the memory of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This past year, we have experienced trials similar to those faced by Dr. King himself. This past year, we have also fought injustices similar to those rebuked by Dr. King. Just a few weeks ago, we witnessed our capital under siege by the forces that seek to set us back to an America they call great. But we march toward an America that will be even greater. A few weeks ago, we witnessed the election of the first Black senator from Georgia, Raphael Warnock. Also, a few weeks ago, we witnessed the election of the first Jewish senator from Georgia, John Ossoff. These are the actions that will make America great. Today, TCF Bank and I honor a tradition of sponsorship of the Akron Urban League, and together we stand in solidarity for the freedom and advancement of all people, regardless of their race, color, creed, or religion. So it is with great pride that I sit here among you and celebrate the memory of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the future of his legacy felt so vibrantly here today. Thank you, Akron Urban League, for all of your efforts in keeping Dr. King's dream alive. 2021, we continue to march forward. Thank you.
The Akron Urban League also benefits from the support of our elected officials, and we are grateful that State Senator Frank LaRose could be part of this event. Today, we continue the Akron Urban League's tradition of honoring Dr. King and striving to build upon his legacy. Our theme is Coalition of Conscience, bridging the relationship between the African American and Jewish communities. Before we get to the heart of our program, we're going to take a 2-minute break for all of you to get some breakfast or a cup of coffee. But first, let's join Armani Ponder Keith in singing the first verse of Lift Every Voice, which will be followed by Brianna Griggs giving our invocation.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won.
Thank you for that. Good morning. My name is Brianna Griggs, and I'm honored to deliver the invocation for the Akron Urban League Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Breakfast Celebration. Let us bow. Father, we come before you this morning with hearts filled with gratitude. We are most grateful to walk in the deep footsteps of the African American and Jewish civil rights leaders. Today we give honor to their fight. May we always dedicate our strength and resources to those who have been abandoned and who have faced the Jericho Road in life. May we fight for the things we care about and do it in a way that will lead others to join us. May we continually salute great women and men, ensuring this community is better because of their sacrifice. May we remain focused, compassionate, and willing to serve always. In your name we pray, amen.
The way that we celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King Day looks different this year. I know it's painful for many of us that we can't be together in person, but Dr. King's message, Dr. King's teachings are timeless. Pandemics, challenges that we face don't change that. And so let's rededicate ourselves today, just like we do every year, to remembering Dr. King's message in our daily lives, especially as it relates to the work that I do as Ohio's Secretary of State. I often think of Dr. King's 1957 speech, Give Us the Ballot, where he talks about the power of free people to cast a ballot and make change in their community, state, and nation. I think about the experience that I had just a year ago when I traveled with other secretaries of state to Selma, Alabama, where I got to walk in the footsteps of heroes of the civil rights movement, where I got to meet the organizer of the voting registration drive in Dallas County, Alabama, Selma, Alabama, a man named Dr. Bernard Lafayette. I got to have lunch with him and hear his story, hear how he, as a young man with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, said, send me where it's hardest. He was a student in Nashville. He said, I want to go where it's hardest to get African Americans registered to vote. And they said, young man, we'll send you to Selma. His work led to the march that we now know as Bloody Sunday, and the march that eventually made it all the way to the Alabama State Capitol that led to the Voting Rights Act. That experience is something that I'll never forget. Something that is a reminder to me every day. The photo that I've got right here in my office, standing on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, that my job as the Secretary of State is to protect the voting rights of millions of Ohioans. We're proud of the fact that in 2020, we saw the highest turnout we've ever seen in a presidential election, in any election for that matter. We saw the highest participation in early and absentee voting that we've ever seen. But we're not going to rest on our laurels. As much as Ohio is a national leader in voting rights, we have to keep working to get better. And I look forward to partnering with you in that journey as we make sure that every Ohioan can be given the ballot and given the voice in our democracy. I really appreciate the Akron Urban League, and particularly Teresa LeGrier, the president of the Urban League, for the work that she's done to help organize this, and the work that the Urban League has done over the years to help organize this, as well as so many other great community organizations and institutions. Dr. King's legacy matters. It makes a difference in our beloved hometown of Akron, Ohio. And although I think for many of us, we're sad that we can't be together in person as we have been in the past, your spirit and your energy is showing. The passion that you all put into organizing this in a virtual way is showing. And I look forward to being with you all together in person, hopefully next year. And thank you for the work that you're doing to really commemorate this very special.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jolene Lane, and I serve as a board member for the Akron Urban League. The Akron Urban League is pleased to present this annual celebration of the life and legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It is my honor to introduce our special guests as we present a cross-generational conversation delving into the shared legacy of the alliance between African American and Jewish constituents that has persevered for decades from the Civil Rights era to today. At the Akron Urban League, we are committed to honor this local tradition and carry the annual breakfast forward, even though we have had to adjust the way we hold the event. Reverend Dr. King inspired us to believe in personal, social, economic, and global change and the power of his dream for genuine equality, diversity, and love. Throughout his life, Dr. King encouraged a multitude of races, religions, genders, all Americans from all backgrounds to become unified as he visualized his dream for equality. History tells us that the organizers of events fighting for social justice created important alliances among those who believed in the same ideals as Dr. King. Many American Jews have been leaders and active participants exemplifying their belief in the importance of civil rights. Groups from both churches and synagogues were in attendance, respecting the intentions of the organizers to be as inclusive as possible. During the civil rights movement, American Jewish leaders organized, prayed, made speeches, and marched alongside Dr. King and his entourage of African American leaders. They were true allies in the movement, contributing to public pressure on the administration to pass civil rights legislation. During this virtual event, you will hear from two of our top local leaders and two young rising stars as they discuss the shared history, alliance, cooperation in conflicts, and celebrations within our Jewish and African American communities. Together, we fought in the civil rights movement in a strategic and significant way, culminating in the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This crucial alliance, forged more than half a century ago, persists in our contemporary movement in the struggle for racial and economic equality, social justice, inclusion, and civil rights. Most importantly, Dr. King taught us that everyone can make a difference, and every day is an opportunity to be a voice for justice, diversity, equality, and inclusion. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It is my privilege and pleasure to moderate these cross-generational and cross-cultural conversations. Our young professionals will interview our elder scholars and theologians who have a rich history participating in the civil rights movement. So at this time, I would like to introduce the Reverend Dr. Marvin A. Mcmickel, who is both a scholar and theologian. He has doctorates in divinity, ministry, philosophy, and humane letters from Aurora University, Princeton Theological Seminary, Case Western Reserve University, and Payne Theological Seminary, respectively. He also earned a Master of Divinity from Union Theological Seminary and did additional graduate work at Columbia University in the city of New York. Dr. Mcmickel served as president of Colgate Rochester Crozier Divinity School. He was pastor of Antioch Baptist Church in Cleveland, Ohio, and professor emeritus as well. He's a member of the Martin Luther King Jr. International Board of Preachers at Morehouse College. He served as a board member for Cleveland State University, and he's also the author of 15 books, dozens of articles and written scholarly articles and preaching commentaries as well. So welcome, Reverend Dr. Mcmickel.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me.
You're very welcome. Also, I'd like to introduce Miss Abby Kushner Benson. She's currently a sophomore at the College of Worcester in Worcester, Ohio. She's majoring in anthropology and exploring options on what her minor might be. In addition to her studies, she plays for the women's Division III tennis team at the College of Worcester, and she's also on the student council for her school's Hillel as treasurer. Additionally, she's also on the Temple Israel Ritual Committee, and in her free time, she enjoys baking and exploring different types of art media. So if you would like any more information, there are more extensive bios on the Akron Urban League website, so I invite you to check those out. But at this time, I want to turn the floor to Abby, who is going to engage Reverend Mcmickel in a cross-generational, cross-cultural conversation.
Thank you. First off, it's so nice to meet both of you. But my first question would be, if you could you please describe your cultural identity, and how has your identity, particularly with regard to race and religion, been instrumental in your commitment to social justice?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm an African American, born and raised in Chicago, Illinois. I left Chicago, went to New York City, spent some time there, and then New Jersey. Left New Jersey and came to Cleveland. Left Cleveland and went to Rochester. So I think you could say that most of my time has been spent in two contexts. Context one, urban America, inner city America, and two, by the Great Lakes or by the Atlantic Ocean. So I've always lived near some major body of water, which means that it was places where there was a lot of migration. Folk from other countries, other cultures were always coming and going. So I've lived at the crossroads of America for most of my life. Now, how did that influence me? I think by virtue of being around diversity, I always found racial, cultural, religious diversity to be the norm. I was never surprised when an Islamic mosque or Jewish synagogue or a Buddhist temple showed up. I was never surprised when people in my schools, elementary and high school, came from multilingual families. Chicago was a town with at least 37 languages spoken in most schools. So diversity has never been my problem. Intolerance of diversity has always been my problem.
That's a great lead into my actual second question. And I was wondering if you could describe a time when you crossed like a racial, religious, or ethnic boundary and got a glimpse into the experience of others who did not share your cultural background. Yeah. And
believe it or not, I'm now 72 years old. So I was in college between 1966 and 1970. I was a pre-religion major. I was always heading toward the ministry. So in 1969, I was asked by the dean of the Department of Religion to spend a summer in a cultural context different than my own. I was sent to Baraboo, Wisconsin. Baraboo, Wisconsin doesn't have a Black person in the county. I was the only Black person in the county. And it's a primarily agricultural community, largely either dairy farmers or hay farmers. There was a kind of a symmetry. Some folk grew the hay that fed the cows. Other folks made the milk and the cheese products that came from the cows. I came from Chicago. I thought that milk came out of cartons, and I had no idea what hay was. I spent the summer of 1969 in a place that I would never otherwise have intentionally gone. The only thing that Baraboo was famous for besides its agriculture is it's the home of the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus. When the circus goes off the road, they spend their winters in Baraboo, Wisconsin. So yeah, I spent the summer with white farmers who took me into their home every night, a different one for dinner. I must say, once they got to know me and I got to know them, whatever suspicions we might have had about the other quickly melted away. It helped me to appreciate the fact that racism and bigotry is usually built upon not knowing much about the other person, and therefore it is easy to dehumanize them. Once you get to know them, once you spend time with them, once you sit with them for dinner, go with them to the movies, go with them to church, go with them out into the fields. Now, bear in mind, this is a farming community, so they were up at 4 a.m. and in bed by 8:30. I was always out of rhythm. I could never hook up with that. So I never tried to become a farmer. I would just catch them, off hours. But it was a great experience. I'm the better for that summer of 1969.
So could you also explain how maybe this experience influenced your future life and career going into it, or elaborate a little bit further on that?
Yeah, I think for me, it has helped me to do a few things. It has helped me to not quickly categorize people. All white people are this, all Black people are that, all Asian people. When you spend that much time around folk different than yourself, you get to know them as persons. And I think the fact that so many people in this country live in racial isolation, they live in all white or all Black neighborhoods, or they go to all white or all Black schools, or they're in mostly white workplaces. They don't have the occasion to meet people and sit with them long enough to know them as individuals. I would say that one of the things that Dr. King worked really hard at was to maintain multi-generational and multicultural involvement in the civil rights movement. And I think the movement suffered greatly when it ceased to be a multi-generational and multicultural movement. And in the summer of 1966, Martin Luther King Jr. brought the Southern Christian Leadership Conference to Chicago in partnership with a local civil rights group led by a man named Al Raby, R-A-B-Y, because Dr. King wanted to demonstrate that the problem of racial segregation was not a Southern problem. People in the North, kind of looked down on the South as if to say, well, that's where the problem is, Mississippi, Georgia, the Carolinas, Texas, Louisiana. When in point of fact, the four most racially segregated cities in America in 1966 were, in this order, Chicago, Cleveland, Detroit, and Gary, Indiana. In terms of neighborhood segregation, it was much more entrenched in the North than it was in the South, in part because of sheer demographics, So he came to Chicago in 1966 for an open housing demonstration. I was working a summer job, read about the demonstrations in the newspaper, went on the first night that he was going to preach at Liberty Baptist Church on what was then South Parkway, what is now Martin Luther King Jr. Drive, in part because of that. Got involved in the marches and the demonstrations, going to City Hall, going out where there were white Nazis and Nazi banners and Confederate flags in Chicago. Confederate flags in Chicago. Our job was to march alongside. They had two kind of marchers. Some walked in columns, like 6 or 8 across, and then younger people would march on the outside of the columns. Our job was to catch, block, or deter thrown objects from hitting the line of marchers. And so, I got hit with everything you can imagine and called everything you can imagine. But we persisted, pray-ins, sit-ins, kneel-ins, sing-ins, march-ins, bleed-ins. At the end of that summer, Chicago was as racially segregated as it was before we started. Which was his point? Segregation is entrenched in the culture of America, not just in the culture of the South. But she had to expose it so the world could see it.
I was just wondering also, I know there's many parallels to the protests happening this past summer and that are continuing going on for the Black Lives Matter movement. I was wondering if you could possibly point out some differences you saw between the social justice, civil rights movement protests, like the parallels and the differences you see today.
Yeah. Most of the demonstrations of my generation were initiated by us in pursuit of a policy. Voting Rights Act, Civil Rights Bill, to desegregate a lunch counter, to enter a university. There were obvious social policies that could be named, attacked, and defeated. You could desegregate a bus. That was your victory. You could desegregate a lunch counter. That was your victory. You could make segregation in public accommodations illegal. That's your victory. What do you do about racism? How do you attack racism? Not a racist policy, not even a racist person, a racist structure, a systemic problem. So it's much more difficult to claim a victory in the current atmosphere because the target is different. You're not going after a change in a policy. You're going after a change in the fundamental structure of a society rooted in historical racial disparities.
Reverend Mcmickel, you mentioned that Dr. King had one of his major tenets was nonviolent resistance, nonviolent protest. Do you want to give us any final words on looking at that legacy in juxtaposition to the events that occurred yesterday?
Thank you for that opportunity. If there's one thing that those of us who were involved in the civil rights demonstration were told over and over and over again, is that we are not there to inflict damage. We're not there to instigate problems or fights. If we're hit, we're not supposed to hit back. It was non-violent in the sense that we will accept abuse, but never inflict it. The event that I saw on television yesterday, one, was not restrained by law enforcement. I want to start with that. I have seen Black marchers peacefully walking down the street and confronted by police officers with motorized vehicles in SWAT gear and high-powered rifles to surround and harass absolutely nonviolent, unarmed Black protesters. Ferguson, Missouri, the best example, but also in Washington last June. Donald Trump wanted to walk from the White House to St. John's Episcopal Church. He used the National Guard to clear the way. Pepper spray, gas, folk on horseback. Yesterday was an insurrection. Let's not use the wrong word. It was not a protest. It was not a demonstration. It was an unsuccessful coup of the US government designed to prevent Joe Biden and Kamala Harris from being confirmed by the Senate according to the US Constitution. And that coup was not against Trump's government. That coup was instigated. Now contrast that with Martin King, who when hit would turn the cheek, and when insulted would just keep going, but would never in 1,000 years have thought about violence or tearing up property or breaking out windows or going through somebody's desk. Now, let me just say this last thing. When I saw somebody carrying the Confederate battle flag through the United States Capitol, the center of our resistance to the Confederacy, I thought we had fought a war to keep that flag lowered forever. And here was a man, proud as he could be, carrying the Confederate battle flag through the U.S. Capitol.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Miss Abby Kushner Benson. Thank you, Reverend Dr. Marvin Mcmickel. It's been a pleasure to share this stage with you. Thank you for participating with us in our celebration of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. And I wanted to say thank you to all of our guests in the audience for joining us today.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
It's been an honor. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you. I've enjoyed being with you. I wish you all the best at Worcester. I've been there a few times.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to our second conversation. It is my pleasure at this time to moderate our second conversation, cross-generational. At this time, I'd like to welcome Rabbi Horowitz and Chikamnele Nkwacha, who will be in conversation about different events in the civil rights movement and the history there. Rabbi David Horowitz is the Rabbi Emeritus of Temple Israel in Akron, Ohio. Rabbi Horowitz served congregations also in Indianapolis and Hammond, Indiana, as well as Queensland, Australia. The rabbi is a scholar, theologian, and social activist whose career has encompassed leadership in all of those areas. He has a bachelor's degree in English literature from Tulane University, and a second bachelor's of Hebrew letters, a Master of Arts, his ordination, and Doctor of Divinity, all from the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in Cincinnati, Ohio. He He has been a professor of philosophy and theology at Calumet College in Indiana and has taught courses in ethnic studies at Kent State University. So welcome, Rabbi Horowitz.
Thank you. Good to be here. Thank you for those nice introductory words.
You're quite welcome. And Chiknomnelian Kwacha is a 2020 graduate of Akron Early College High School. She currently attends The Ohio State University, and she's double majoring in biomedical engineering and studio art with a minor in city and regional planning. Chika is extremely proud of her Nigerian American heritage. She is a national award-winning artist. Her passion for civic and social justice and for showcasing the Black experience inspires her art and has led her to be a voice for social change in her community. So welcome, Chika.
Thank you.
So at this time, I'm going to turn the floor over to Chika, who's going to engage in a conversation with Rabbi Horowitz.
But I'd first like to start by getting like your background so I could understand your story more. So what would you identify as in regards to culture and race and also religion? I mean, I think we can understand it for the best part, but if you could explain that, that'd be great.
Yes, thank you. And I remember water fountains being separated. I remember bathrooms being separated. I remember waiting rooms being separated. I went on to go to Tulane University in New Orleans. Things were not much different there. At the time, Tulane was also a segregated university, but only segregated for Blacks. There were Asians that were part of the student body. There were other people of color who were part of the student body. But at the time, there were no individuals that identified as Black individuals who were part of the student body or faculty. I entered in 1960. In 1963, steps were taken to begin the process of desegregating Tulane University. At the time, that was only one African-American student, a graduate student in political science, who was living in the dormitory. There was a rally on the steps of the City Hall in New Orleans in 1963, and I was part of an organization known as Hillel. Hillel is the Jewish students organization on most campuses. And I was sitting there, and the Hillel director got a call saying, is there anybody that can come down and speak at the rally in City Hall tonight? Well, since I was sitting there, I got tapped to do it. And I did indeed go down there. And I know that I probably didn't speak for more than 30 seconds. And I know I didn't say anything terribly important or profound. But it turned out that I was the other white speaker. There was the Catholic priest that was there, and I was there, and those were the only two white presenters at the program. That catapulted me actually into some national news, which surprised me and surprised them. But that was my first experience really of taking an active vocal role in trying to address the social justice issues that existed in the African American community.
Would be, would you say that the segregation that was at the time, was it more race related, or did it also branch out to religion in terms of like, were Jews segregated, or was that not?
No, it was racial. It was most definitely racial. Jews have historically and still suffered the plague of anti-Semitism. Certainly that's true today. In fact, I was watching the images of the breach of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday. And one of the participants there was wearing a sweatshirt, I think. It didn't look like a t-shirt, it was a sweatshirt. And emblazoned on it were the words Camp Auschwitz, indicating so very strongly that somehow Jews were a problem, obviously, and that they should be eradicated, and celebrating the Holocaust years. So in that moment, if not before, I realized that we're all in this together. That if any one person, because of race or religion, are discriminated against, and I would include those in the Muslim community as well, as long as we allow that discrimination to take place, we are all open to discrimination in the minority communities.
How would you say we should bridge the gap between each other because of the fact that we all are in the same struggle?
And I think we're natural allies. I really do. I think that that was true in the 1960s. Again, a quick story. I went to a barber shop to get a haircut in New Orleans, and sitting on the desk or the table close to the barber was a table of pamphlets. And one of the pamphlets showed Jews and African Americans being seen as equals, and not in a good way. I think there is also a feeling among those who are deeply prejudiced that somehow or other Jews are behind the Black struggle, and that we're causing the Black struggle, and that we're to take blame for the Black struggle. I think that there has been some separation along the way between the two communities. I think that, and again, well before you were born, I think that probably started in the very late 1960s with the teachers' strike in New York City, where most of the teachers in Black areas were Jewish, and there was a strong feeling on the part of the African American community that that should change. And I think there was a friction that started there. I think that it was further separated by the feeling on the part of the African American communities that Jews were too much a part of the movement, too much of a part of the control of the movement. The NAACP, after all, was founded by a Jew, not an African American. And so from that perspective, I think tensions began to form. I sense that for the last 10, maybe 15 years, those tensions have relaxed. And I'm optimistic that we can help one another, because certainly there is anti-Black sentiment in the Jewish community. I would be really, really lying to you if I said that didn't exist. And I suspect as well that there's anti-Semitic feelings in the African American community. So at this point, because we are both, I think, necessary to this struggle together, we have to take steps to start bridging those gaps and those stereotypes that have come up with in terms of the two communities.
So in regards to tensions between the Black community and the Jewish community, that, obviously the connection in some way has been lost throughout the years. I think some of the issues that I've heard from the African American community is that we're not necessarily relatable in our experiences in terms of how we've experienced oppression in America compared to Jewish Americans. So what would you say to an African American who believes that essentially our experiences or our oppression isn't the same because they believe that African Americans have paid more of a price? And also regarding how we haven't received reparations, but we believe that the Jewish community has, and how there might be some forms of privilege. So how would you, help African Americans to understand that in some way you have experienced oppression that relates to the same way we have?
Jews are not treated as poorly as the African American community in white society. We have had the opportunity to grow economically well beyond the ability of the African American community to grow their economy. So there are differences. Let's talk about the reality of that. There's definitely a difference. On the other hand, anti-Semitism is very much still a part of our society today, and we're seeing it growing. In fact, this year is probably one of the worst years for the rise of anti-Semitism. Well, maybe the last 4 years, but this year has been not good at all. So that the African American community has to understand that we feel vulnerable, that we feel at risk, and that we need those voices from the African American community to say, no, we're not going to tolerate that either. So I think that there is a necessary interrelationship that has to come if we're really going to make progress on bringing this alliance back once again.
So how would you say we should go about advocating for ways in which we can educate people so that we can bridge those gaps? Because you did say that it's important for the youth to be able to understand that. So how would you say that should be handled?
We've got to talk to each other on every level, on every age level. We're not doing that yet. Unless I've missed something along the way, we're not doing that yet. We're not bringing our youth groups together. We're not talking with one another. It's not easy to do because not everybody's a part of a youth group. So we've got to develop material that can be used in both communities to help them understand the fears and expectations of the other. I don't think we've done that. I don't think we've yet been able to develop those audiovisual materials that can help this quest for understanding. I don't know if it's changed much, but when my children were in school, history ended with the Second World War. Pretended like nothing happened after that. I don't know that the Jewish kids know as clearly the relationship between the two communities that existed in the 1950s and 1960s. I don't know that the African American communities understand that that alliance was there because we both needed each other. Now, at that moment, the Black community needed white faces. I don't know that the Civil Rights Act of 1963 or the Voter Rights Act of 1964 would have passed without a whole bunch of white faces in the gallery of Congress. And among them were large numbers of Jews. But beyond that, we're still living in a segregated school system. We are not talking with one another. So pressure has to be put upon those who have some control over that to help fix it. Busing apparently didn't work. It fragmented the Black community and it didn't integrate into the white community. So I think our problems are paramount. I think we're far from a solution to this problem. And I think it affects the Jewish community and the Black community directly, because we too are kind of concentrated in one area. And are not part of the broad section of education that's going on today. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I think the problem is huge. And I don't think we've taken steps yet to be able to see a solving of those problems.
I think to end on a more positive note, however, if anything that I was able to understand within the last couple months, especially the summer of 2020, is understanding that our fight, we haven't completely been alone in our fight, and being able to see young people being out on the streets protesting, not just being, African American, but, seeing other white students and college students being maced and being tear gassed and having rubber bullets shot at them. I do believe that it says a lot to how far we have come, and to understand that the civil rights movement wasn't just successful because we had Martin Luther King, but we had other allies.
And I think that the points made by both of you are very poignant and very strong. I think that the series of events that happened in the summer truly brought out allyship. It has heightened allyship to, I think, a level that has been unseen for a number of years, at least from the perspective of the African American community, where many of the struggles and the marches and so forth, you would see many African Americans marching, but now you really do see integrated crowds marching for social justice and similar struggles. So I want to thank you, Rabbi Horowitz, for the allyship that you represent. I want to thank you very much for your time and your expert opinion today.
The expert, I believe it said.
Thank you to Chika for conducting such a wonderful interview. And I want to thank our audience for joining us today.
And I thank the Urban League for making this possible.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
On behalf of the Board of Directors and staff of the Akron Urban League, we would like to give a huge thank you to each of you that joined us this morning. We hope conversations were very meaningful to you and that you gathered knowledge that you did not have before the presentation. Working together is the only way to long-term success, and we are excited to partner with our Jewish friends. We'd like to thank Reverend Mcmickel and Rabbi Horowitz, Abby Benson, and Chika Nawacha for such great dialogue. And we'd also like to thank all of our other participants that helped make this event a success. Also, a very big thank you to our sponsors, Synthomer, TCF Bank, CBiz, Tia Pharmakitis, Metis Construction, and the Jewish Community Board of Akron. And our board members, Alan Rothenbucher and Jolene Lane, for their participation. And of course, Kim Fleischman and her team for their work in putting this event together. For those that received the AUL breakfast mug and treats, we hope you enjoyed it. In conclusion, we would like to invite you to become a member of our newly established Justice and Equality Giving Society. Information can be obtained at aulgivingsociety.org, or you can call me directly at 234-542-4132. Help us level the playing field as we elevate Greater Akron. This concludes our program, so please have a great rest of your day.